Before we begin, if you want to see more real-life horror, mysterious, and spine-chilling stories like this, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so that every new video comes straight to your phone. Now, let's dive into today's terrifying story.
It was a cold February evening in 2025, and Daniel and Mark had just left the small town of Cedar Falls, a remote area in West Virginia surrounded by thick Appalachian forests, to meet their girlfriends for Valentine's weekend. Daniel's girlfriend, Emily, lived in the next town, Raven Creek, about 90 miles northeast, and Mark's girlfriend, Lily, lived in the small lakeside town of Crystal Pines, about 75 miles to the northwest. The roads between these towns were notorious for being narrow, twisting, and lined with dense forests that blocked any hint of sunlight even during the day, and at night, the shadows seemed to reach out from the trees themselves. They were riding Daniel's old black Harley, a motorcycle that groaned under its own weight, carrying both of them as the wind cut through their jackets and whipped their faces raw. The day had started normally, with the chill of February still biting at their fingers as they packed sandwiches and coffee into a small backpack, but Daniel had a strange feeling that something about this night was different, something that made his skin crawl even before they had left the edge of Cedar Falls. As they passed the abandoned gas station near the outskirts of town, a faint sound of something scraping metal echoed through the forest behind them, but when they turned, no vehicle was there. They shrugged it off, chalking it up to a branch rubbing against the side of the building, yet Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were following them from the tree-line. By 11:30 p.m., they reached the outskirts of Raven Creek, a town famous for its fog that rolled in from the nearby river, thickening the air and muffling every sound. Emily had been waiting on her porch, waving to them under the dim glow of a porch light, and the sight brought a fleeting relief to Daniel, a sense of normalcy before the darkness returned. After an hour spent with Emily, sharing laughter and candy hearts, the two friends prepared to leave for Crystal Pines to meet Lily, taking the back roads that wound through the forested hills. They had been warned by locals to avoid these roads after dark, citing strange disappearances and eerie sightings, but with the adrenaline of youth and the excitement of seeing their girlfriends, they laughed off the warnings. As they entered the shadowed valley that led to Crystal Pines, the temperature dropped suddenly, their breaths visible in the headlights' glow. The trees loomed unnaturally, their branches twisting in shapes that almost resembled hands reaching out to snag them, and the occasional rustle in the underbrush sent chills down their spines. About an hour into the ride, they reached an isolated convenience store where Mark insisted they stop for snacks. As they parked the motorcycle, the air seemed to thicken, an oppressive heaviness pressing down on them, and Daniel noticed a man in a faded trucker jacket standing just inside the door, staring at them with eyes that seemed too wide and unblinking. Mark waved casually, but Daniel's stomach nodded. There was something wrong about the way the man's gaze followed every movement, like he knew exactly where they were headed. They bought a few sodas and chips, and as they stepped outside, a sudden gust of wind slammed the door behind them with a deafening crash, making Daniel jump. The man didn't move or acknowledge them as they left, but as they rode away, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed, not by the trucker, but by something else that prowled silently in the shadows. The roads grew narrower, the fog denser, and as they approached an old wooden bridge spanning a dry creek bed, the headlights illuminated something impossible, a figure, a woman, standing in the middle of the road, her long white hair flowing like smoke and her dress drenched and clinging to her body despite the dry ground. Mark swerved instinctively, nearly losing control, but the woman didn't move aside. Daniel slowed, his heart hammering, and as he got closer, he saw her dragging a tattered burlap sack, and the unmistakable shape of a small child inside. The child's skeleton seemed to rattle with every step she took, and Daniel's mind refused to comprehend the sight. The woman turned her head slowly, revealing hollow black eyes that stared through him like pits of despair. She began to chant in a low, guttural voice, words that seemed ancient and unnatural, echoing through the valley and vibrating in their chests. The motorcycle's engine sputtered as if sensing their fear, and Daniel could barely keep it upright. Mark shouted, "Go! Just go," but Daniel couldn't bring himself to move, frozen in terror. The woman stopped, placed the sack on the bridge's railing, and began performing some kind of ritual, sprinkling yellow powder that looked like dried herbs onto the skeleton and wrapping it in a wreath of dead flowers. The sound of her sobs was horrifyingly human, yet something about it resonated with an unnatural sorrow, a grief that belonged to a realm beyond life. Minutes passed, each stretching into eternity, until she stood, her hollow eyes meeting Daniel's one last time, and then, as if dissolving into the fog, she vanished. Daniel blinked, and the bridge was empty, the night silent except for the rain that began to drizzle, cold and biting. They rode on in silence, the image of the woman burned into their minds. They reached a small roadside diner where a lone man sat in a corner booth, his face obscured by shadow. He nodded at them as they entered, and Daniel noticed a symbol carved into the table in front of him, a spiral with jagged lines that seemed to move subtly when unobserved. The man didn't speak but watched them intently as they ate. Outside, the fog swirled unnaturally, and when Daniel looked up, he could see figures standing among the trees, barely visible, always at the edge of perception, moving closer when he blinked. Mark tried to joke to ease the tension, but his voice was hollow even to himself. They left the diner and continued down Route 79, the asphalt slick with rain, the forest pressing in on all sides. Daniel noticed shadows flitting across the road in the headlights, shapes of people, animals, something else entirely, moving with unnatural grace. The motorcycle's engine began to sputter again, lights dimming intermittently, and Daniel realized that the bike seemed to be fighting them, resisting their movement. Suddenly, a deer-like creature with glowing red eyes emerged from the fog, its antlers unnaturally long, and it bounded across the road. Daniel swerved violently, narrowly avoiding it, and the sound of its growl reverberated in his chest, shaking him to his core. As they continued, a sudden downpour soaked them instantly. Daniel's jacket and Mark's clothes clung to their bodies, yet when Daniel glanced behind him, Mark appeared completely dry, his hair and jacket untouched by the rain. Daniel's voice shook as he called out, but Mark insisted it was just a shower, brushing off the anomaly. They passed an abandoned farmhouse with boarded windows, and inside, a faint light flickered as though someone, or something, was moving. A chilling scream echoed, distant yet horrifyingly close, and Daniel felt his stomach drop as the voice called his name. The road curved sharply, and they found themselves in front of a line of people, figures holding crude weapons, standing silently in the rain. The friends slowed, fear rendering them motionless, as one stepped forward, a man with eyes that glowed faintly in the darkness. "Where are you going?" he asked, his voice a low growl. Daniel stammered, We're just trying to get home." The man's lips curled into a grin that revealed too many teeth, all yellowed and broken. "Home," he repeated. "Home doesn't exist here. Not tonight." The figures parted slightly as a vehicle emerged from the fog, a battered white SUV, and out stepped a figure Daniel recognized instantly, Mark. He approached silently, eyes wide, calm yet unnerving. "You left me," he said, voice flat. "I waited with the police, and you drove off. I had to come get you." Daniel's blood ran cold as he realized the Mark standing in front of him was the one who had been following them in the shadows, the one untouched by rain, the one who had vanished when he turned his head. He blinked, and Mark was gone, replaced by a hollow silhouette that seemed to absorb the surrounding fog. Daniel's mind screamed, but he had no sound, only the echo of wet leaves snapping behind him. The SUV's engine roared, a deafening sound that seemed to come from inside his skull rather than the vehicle itself, and a shadowy hand reached from the back window, brushing his shoulder with a cold that burned through bone. Daniel grabbed the throttle and forced the bike forward, skidding through the mud and leaves, narrowly avoiding the figures that lunged from the roadside. Ahead, the forest thickened, darkness folding in, and every tree seemed to lean toward them, branches clawing at the headlights. Daniel's vision blurred, shapes of people, women, children, animals, all twisting together in impossible forms, watching, waiting, their whispers crawling under his skin. The motorcycle spluttered again, stalling on a steep incline, leaving him and Mark stranded on a ridge where the fog was nearly solid, and from the mist, a woman appeared, hair white as bone, eyes black voids, holding a small skeletal child in her arms. She began to chant, low and guttural, and Daniel felt an urge to throw himself from the ridge, his mind screaming to escape the sound. Mark grabbed him, voice trembling, We have to move, now. As they pushed the bike forward, the woman's wails rose, echoing through the valley, and shadows stretched like hands trying to grab them, twisting reality itself. Trees bent unnaturally, the fog forming shapes that Daniel could not describe, a swirling mass of faces screaming silently. Every time he looked back, the woman was closer, dragging the child's skeleton, laying it out on the road as though performing some dark ritual. Daniel's heart pounded, sweat and rain mixing, adrenaline and terror merging as the road narrowed further, cliffs rising on either side. They descended into a clearing, headlights catching the outline of a hanging woman, her body swinging gently despite no wind, and Daniel felt his soul freeze. The motorcycle roared to life on its own as if pushed by some unseen force, carrying them past the horrors in a blur of motion, yet the echoes of screams followed, embedding themselves into Daniel's mind. They passed a local farmer, an old man who had been tending his fields in the early morning hours, and he looked at them with eyes wide in disbelief, muttering, You were lucky to survive. If you had stopped, Daniel and Mark didn't need to hear more, the story etched in their minds forever, the forest, the road, the figures, the chanting woman, they would never forget, and the terror clung to them like a second skin, a night that had become a memory too real to ever release. After barely escaping the horrors of the ridge, Daniel and Mark rode in stunned silence, the motorcycle's engine whining under their grip as if sensing their fear. The fog clung to them like a living entity, swirling around their bodies, seeping into every crevice of clothing and helmet, and the chill was unlike any winter cold they had ever felt. It wasn't just physical, it felt sentient, malicious, pressing against their lungs, filling their minds with whispers that were impossible to ignore. Every mile they traveled along Route 79, the road seemed to stretch endlessly, the trees pressing closer, shadows bending into impossible angles that Daniel could not comprehend. He tried to keep his eyes on the asphalt, but the corner of his vision was filled with shapes, flickers of movement, the glint of eyes reflecting the motorcycle's lights. Mark kept gripping his friend tightly, his face pale, jaw locked, muttering, I don't like this. I don't like this at all. Something's following us. Daniel didn't respond. He didn't know how to. Every sound, the groan of the motorcycle, the rustling of the forest, the occasional snap of a branch, felt amplified, like the world had turned against them. About 20 minutes into the ride, they noticed the outlines of an old church ahead, abandoned, windows boarded, paint peeling, its steeple sagging like it was bowing to some unseen force. For some reason, Daniel's stomach twisted when he saw it. It was the kind of place locals whispered about, a church that had burned decades ago, rumored to have been a scene of ritualistic murders. The fog seemed thicker around it, curling into the shape of hands reaching for the cracked doors. Mark whispered, We should stop. We need to. I don't know, regroup. But Daniel shook his head, No. We just need to keep going. Just past this stretch, the road opens up. We'll be fine. He tried to sound confident, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. As they passed the church, the fog seemed to part. Like curtains, revealing the remains of an old graveyard, headstones tilted and cracked, some broken entirely, as though the earth itself had rejected them. But the movement behind the stones caught Daniel's eye, a shadowy figure crouched, watching, waiting, its head tilted at an impossible angle, the shape of a child's body but with limbs too long, too thin, and hands dragging along the wet ground. He blinked, and the figure was gone, but the impression remained burned into his mind. They rode on, the silence broken only by the motorcycle and the occasional whisper that Daniel was certain he heard, words he could not understand, a language guttural and ancient, vibrating directly into his skull. After another hour of riding, the road narrowed further, flanked on one side by a sheer drop into a river gorge, water dark and churning below, and on the other side by jagged cliffs where the trees leaned unnaturally over the road. Daniel slowed, gripping the handlebars tightly, and that's when he saw the first figure standing in the middle of the road. A man, or something resembling a man, dressed in a tattered gray coat, head covered with matted hair, face obscured, just standing and staring. Daniel's heart froze. He tried to swerve, but the road was slick with rain and ice, the tires skidding dangerously close to the edge of the drop. Mark screamed, "Daniel! Stop!" But Daniel's hands were locked in terror, unable to brake fully. The figure raised a hand slowly, pointing toward them, and the air suddenly felt thick, heavy, pressing down like water. Daniel's chest burned, lungs aching. They barely managed to swerve past, the motorcycle fishtailing dangerously. As they passed, the man, or whatever it was, vanished into the fog like smoke. They both were silent for several minutes, trying to catch their breath, until Mark muttered, We need to stop. We can't keep going like this." Daniel agreed reluctantly, spotting the faint outline of an old wooden shed a few meters off the road. They pushed the bike toward it, parking under its sagging roof, rain dripping from the moss-covered shingles. The shed smelled of damp wood and decay, the air thick with the stench of mold and something else, metallic, like old blood. Daniel turned to Mark, eyes wide. Do you see that?" Mark followed his gaze and froze. On the wall of the shed, scratched into the wood, were dozens of symbols, spirals, jagged lines, and shapes that seemed to twist when you looked at them for too long. Some looked like letters, some like human figures, some like screaming faces. Daniel's stomach dropped. This isn't normal," he whispered. "We're not supposed to be here." As they sat there, trying to warm their hands with the small heat from the motorcycle engine, a faint sound began outside, footsteps, soft, deliberate, coming from the forest. Not random, not animals, but something walking slowly, deliberately, circling them. Daniel peered into the fog, but visibility was almost zero, only the shapes of trees moving unnaturally, shadows that didn't align with the light. The footsteps grew louder, more defined, and then, a child's voice rang out, clear, sweet, and terrifying, "Why are you here?" Daniel shivered, looking at Mark, who shook his head, unable to speak. The voice repeated, "Why are you here?" and then a soft giggle, followed by the sound of dragging, as if something heavy was being pulled through the mud. Daniel swallowed hard, gripping the handlebars. We have to leave now," he whispered. Mark nodded, but as Daniel tried to start the motorcycle, it refused. The engine clicked and sputtered, dead. Panic set in. From the fog, a figure emerged. A woman, white hair plastered to her face from the rain, eyes black voids, dragging what appeared to be a burlap sack, the outline of a small body inside. She stopped a few feet from them, head tilting unnaturally, lips moving, whispering words Daniel couldn't understand. The fog seemed to thicken around her, the air vibrating with a low hum, a sound that resonated directly into their bones. Daniel could feel it, a pressure building in his chest, the weight of unseen eyes pressing on him. Mark stumbled backward, tripping over the wet wooden floor, and the woman turned her gaze to him, letting out a wail so sharp and raw it made Daniel's ears ring. Something moved behind the fog, dozens of figures now, children with hollow eyes, adults with twisted limbs, emerging silently, encircling them. Daniel's hands shook as he tried to push the bike forward, but it felt as if invisible hands were holding it in place, pulling it backward into the fog. The woman crouched down, placing the sack on the floor, and began a ritual, laying out the child's skeleton, sprinkling yellow powder and draping a garland of decayed flowers across the tiny bones. Her sobs were human, yet inhuman, echoing off the shed walls, vibrating in the air, growing louder and more unbearable. Daniel tried to move the bike, pushing with every ounce of strength, the tires barely gripping the slick ground. The figures around them didn't move, just watched, shadows stretching unnaturally, faces morphing as the fog twisted. After what felt like hours but could have been seconds, the woman stood, staring at them for a long moment, and then slowly vanished into the fog. Daniel gasped, heart hammering, sweat mixing with rain, and finally the motorcycle roared to life, as if the engine had waited for her to leave. They didn't hesitate, pushing the bike down the road as fast as the slick asphalt allowed, avoiding shadows that leapt out from the sides, avoiding shapes that moved in the trees, and every time Daniel looked in the rearview mirror, he saw glimpses of her, white hair, hollow eyes, dragging the tiny body behind her, vanishing when he blinked. The road twisted, the trees leaning closer, and somewhere in the distance, the low hum continued, the whispering voices growing louder, repeating words in a language older than memory. Daniel realized with a cold certainty that the forest wasn't just a place, it was alive, aware, waiting for them. They passed the ruins of an old farmhouse, windows dark and broken, and inside, the silhouettes of people, children, animals, shifting impossibly, standing in corners, watching. Daniel tried not to think about what would happen if they stopped, if the bike died completely, if they lost momentum, because the forest would claim them. And then the rain intensified, sheets of water falling like knives, blurring vision, chilling them to the bone. Daniel's hands were numb, Mark holding on as tightly as he could, screaming over the roar of the rain, but there was no reply, no relief, only the road ahead and the endless press of fog and shadow. Suddenly, headlights appeared behind them, but these weren't normal. They were dim, flickering, no reflection on the wet asphalt, moving in ways that defied physics, accelerating and decelerating without reason. Daniel swerved, trying to escape, but the lights mirrored his movements, closing in, and from them emerged shapes, figures that walked without touching the ground, faces twisted, mouths moving as though screaming in silence. Daniel's mind screamed to go faster, to escape, but the road twisted impossibly, leading them closer to the edge of the gorge, cliffs rising to one side, water rushing below. And then, in the mist, he saw a woman hanging from a tree, swaying gently, hair white as bone, garland around her neck, eyes hollow, watching. And Daniel realized, this was the heart of the forest, the center of its hunger, and they were right in its grasp. He pushed the bike forward, tires skidding, engine screaming, and somehow, through sheer terror and blind luck, they reached the edge of the fog, the trees thinning, the road straightening, the sounds of the voices fading into the distance. But the images, the visions, the whispers, they were burned into their minds, and Daniel knew, without a doubt, that nothing on this road would ever be safe again, that the forest had marked them, and the night's horrors would follow them forever, shadows at the edge of every thought, a lingering dread that no human mind should endure.
If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell icon so that you get notifications on your mobile as soon as our new videos are released. This is my new YouTube channel, and I sincerely hope for your support. I make videos for you, so please let me know in the comments what type of videos you enjoy watching, and I will upload more content related to your preferences. Thank you.